Welcome to the Transatlantic Tech Talk, your go-to podcast for the latest news and developments in tech, startups, and policy across Europe and the United States. I'm Stefan, and in each episode, my co-host Veronica and I dive into the trends shaping the transatlantic tech ecosystem, from groundbreaking innovations to the policy shifts that define the landscape.
Hi, I'm Veronica. Today we're kicking things off with a timely and critical discussion. What does a Trump 2.0 administration mean for startups, businesses, tech, and the EU-US relationship in general? We're recording this on Inauguration Day as the new administration takes office, and we'll break down the key implications for regulation, AI policy, trade, and beyond for you. Stay with us. This is going to be an insightful ride. Let's dive in.
Good morning from San Francisco. Hello, everybody. This is our first LinkedIn Live. Hello, Veronica. How's it going in Europe?
Hi, good morning, good evening, Stefan. Great to be here. Great to see you. I've had a longer day than you already, but I think both of us have been following all of the inauguration news and all of the latest coming in. So warm welcome from my side to everyone who's joining us. We're live on LinkedIn and also other social media channels. And it's exciting. I'm really excited about this opportunity today.
Amazing. Yeah, please bear with us. We might have some kind of technical hiccups here and there. We are going to take into account any comments that you may have. So please put them in the comment box and chat. We're going to do a little sort of Q&A rapid fire round towards the end. And this is the first in hopefully a series of conversations that Veronica and I are going to have, including guests under the general theme of Transatlantic Tech Talks, with Veronica representing the European side of the transatlantic relationship, me representing the US side, trying to tackle contemporary issues in tech policy and the transatlantic relationship. So do stay tuned and continue to follow our adventures. We're going to start off with a quick round of intros. My name is Stefan Reis, or Rice, if you want to pronounce it the American way. I'm based here in San Francisco. I moved to the US a couple of years ago for grad school, finished an MBA at the Wharton School of Finance and the Harvard Kennedy School last year, 2024, and started a startup advisory business initially in New York, but I moved out here to the Bay Area. In October, I advise early-stage founders on go-to-market strategy, fundraising, policy, and regulatory strategy based on my experience at Coinbase on their policy team during my grad degree, my experience in the Austrian federal government in the late 2010s in Doge, Austrian version of Doge, Ministry of Finance at the Chancellor's office, as well as Boston Consulting Group, where I started my career all the way back in Vienna around 10-ish years ago. And I'm super excited to be joined by Veronica, who's an old friend and a legend in European public affairs circles. So Veronica, please take it away from your side.
Thanks, Stefan. My name is Veronica Möller. I am excited to establish this format with you. And as you said, I'm bringing the European perspective with a fond heart for US politics. And I think both of our intention is to bridge the Atlantic, and I think it's more important than ever to kind of see what the other continent is doing and join forces in those interesting times. I bring several years in EU public affairs, including in the European Parliament as policy advisor, actually during first election of Donald Trump. So that was certainly an interesting time. Was leading government affairs at industry leaders such as Red Bull and EU Public Affairs, and most recently led the team of the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber in Brussels as part of the diplomatic corps. And I started my own consulting business, and I'm trying to help and enable businesses to navigate those disruptions in tech and sustainability policy, and excited to talk about the Trump 2.0 inauguration today with you.
Adam has had a quick reaction. I mean, most people on the stream who know me probably know this, but Red Bull is one of my favorite companies all time. Amazing brand, amazing leadership. And
We're not sponsored, by the way.
I love your mission, and I think we're really aligned in terms of the mindset and the things that we're trying to build. So it's great to team up for this. Maybe briefly, so why are we doing this today? Inauguration is happening live, so some of you may be watching on the side or have a ticker running. Donald Trump, president-elect, but to be president in a few minutes, I suppose, is inside the Capitol building with the various guests of honor. There's kind of a bigger public viewing at the Capital One Arena in DC. There's people following all over the world. There's various heads of state visiting. We're going to do a quick, maybe lightning round of interesting or fun facts that we, thought were noteworthy the last couple of days. So one, I'm not sure how big this was in European media, but here in the US, there was a lot of reporting around, the donations to the Inauguration Fund that's basically used to organize the festivities. And basically, the last couple of weeks, there was this trickling of messages. Every day, there was first of all, a new big tech CEO who flew to Mar-a-Lago to visit Trump, but also a new contribution by a tech company of like 1 million or 2 million, or personal contribution by CEOs. So overall, they raised over 150 million to organize Inauguration weekend and the various festivities. So that's huge and probably the biggest in history. Second interesting fact, there's very severe cold weather and snowstorms on the East Coast, which is why, for the first time in a generation, the inauguration is not taking place outdoors on the National Mall, but rather inside the Capitol. The last time was actually 1985, which was Ronald Reagan's second inauguration, a time where I assume most of us were not quite born yet. And then two more interesting things that are more, the past 24 hours, like recent developments. But one, Donald Trump is probably the first president-elect in U.S. history to launch a meme coin under his name just before being inaugurated. Same as the first lady who followed a couple hours after. So that was a big, piece of discussion in my friend group. And lastly, probably also the first time in recent years where the outgoing president issued pardons to people preemptively. So Anthony Fauci, who was big during kind of COVID-19 as an advisor on COVID policy, he received a presidential pardon by Biden before he left office, as well as some other figures. So that's, I think a very unique situation as well. But yeah, on a personal note, I was at the inauguration in 2013, Obama's second term. It was incredibly cold. It was quite a spectacle. It was a very different time in the US, in Europe, and in the world. So I think today is a pretty special day. And we're going to talk briefly about Trump's first inauguration in 2016. Veronica, at the time you were in Brussels in the European Parliament. A lot of the US was in shock. A lot of Europe was, let's say, caught by surprise. So do you have some, recollections that you want to share with us on that one?
Yeah, I think it was a quite memorable moment, honestly. As I said, I was a policy advisor back then in the European Parliament, and I think the surprise and shock was palpable. Just walking the halls and the aisles of the Parliament. You have a very young crowd working there. It's long hours, but from different political perspectives, not only by partisan like in the US, but you have all of these European political groups. But the surprise, and I think back then also maybe a little bit of denial, like how could that have happened? We weren't kind of caught by surprise and not really prepared. I think that certainly has changed. We've the Europeans have learned their lesson and have also certainly caught up on how to deal with Trump. He's kind of developed a new political playbook. I think that certainly has also changed the transatlantic relationship. We've seen that there has been kind of a backpedaling now during the Biden administration. Some critics were saying that during Trump, diplomacy was dead. But I think that certainly had impacts. I think the Europeans are also now talking, generally about the institutions and leaders in Brussels. I think there has been kind of a cautious approach lately. We obviously have the new commission and the commissioners. led by Ursula von der Leyen. But of course, everybody's now looking at DC, and well, everybody's kind of expecting the executive orders coming in. So I mean, as Trump does, he's promised a lot to happen within the first days or hours. There has been some backpedaling from his team, also saying that there is not a peace treaty to be expected for Ukraine, which is obviously a pressing issue for Europe due to the vicinity and also the question of national security. I don't know if Stefan is still with us, but I'll continue. Maybe we'll, yeah, let me just text him real quick. And the approach, of course, has also changed in that the pressing issues that are expected to be presented by Trump, most notably immigration, tariffs, and deregulation. Of course, the question of tariffs is of high importance for Europeans. Welcome back, Stefan. So there has been a Trump task force, of course, tasked to prepare for the inauguration with a special focus on tariffs and trade. And I think also what has changed is the political, not only the political climate, but kind of the economic development. So looking at the latest prognosis by the IMF, for example, we see that the US is expected to have economic growth in 2025, as opposed to Europe and also China. And so for the Eurozone, I think we're at about 1.4, whereas the US is at 2 if I remember correctly, I think 2.6, 2.7. And the former powerhouse Germany is stagnant, and also kind of waiting for the political campaign for the Bundestag to conclude. As many of you know, we have kind of this. Well, we have the snap election coming up in Germany, and so there's a certain. I wouldn't say vacuum. It's not like no one's deciding anything in Europe. But of course, there's a lack of there's not one person to call, and we've heard that in the past, that there is no one person representing Europe, but rather a multitude of players, which can be helpful because you have. You can send different people. In the case of the inauguration, there is Giorgia Meloni actually attending the inauguration, which is a first, because normally you only have ambassadors attending, but it could be, in a benefit for the European Union, because you have different players that are approaching Trump and could broker different deals and negotiations.
100%, yeah. I love the insights there.
Sorry, I remember that you actually attended the Obama inauguration. So, what are the differences you're expecting?
Well, I mean, the Obama inauguration is a really long time ago, and I was just kind of, a visitor to this country, and I wasn't following the discourse as closely. I was going to do the same comparison that you just did between Trump, 1.0 in 2016, Trump 2.0 this time around, and also kind of follow the same dimensions that you outlined in terms of general mood, economic development, the governance kind of leadership perspective. And honestly, I've been really bullish on the US for many years, which is why I moved here in 2021. But as you highlighted, I think growth has been phenomenal. Productivity growth, in particular, from an economic perspective, is really strong. The tech sector is stronger than ever, and also has a stronger presence in DC than it ever did, which is something we're going to talk about more as well. And the whole AI story, is happening. It's unfolding. It's a bit of a roller coaster. There's certainly a lot of hype, but it drives a lot of the market action, a lot of the venture capital action, a lot of the stock action. But markets have been really robust. Growth has been really robust, and everybody's pretty excited. I think everybody's feeling pretty bullish on the economy. The Federal Reserve managed to tame inflation. Obviously, the US has had the big advantage of not dealing with the same level of conflict, uncertainty, energy dependence that Europe had with Russia and Ukraine over the last couple of years. So everybody's feeling pretty good. And also in terms of the election, people were a little worried that, maybe there's not going to be a clear outcome. But to your point around governance and leadership, this time, Trump had a pretty convincing, resounding victory in the Electoral College. Plus, the Republicans managed to win both the House and the Senate. So, one thing we're going to see this week is, executive orders. The office of the presidency in the U.S. is really, really strong, stronger than a chancellor, a prime minister, or a president in most European countries. So basically, coming in on day one, essentially today and tomorrow, there's a lot of policy levers he can pull, Trump can pull, without needing to pass a law or wait for Congress to take action. But then, of course, for bigger, more ambitious pieces, you do need a legal framework. And winning the House and the Senate, Trump has the opportunity to do that. So, from an economic perspective, from a general vibes, atmosphere perspective, from a mandate, leadership, clarity perspective, he's really doing well. And another thing, two more points maybe. One point I found surprising, even the New York Times yesterday reported in a poll, basically the percentage of Americans that agree with Trump policies is even higher than Trump's share of the vote. So I think a lot of his policy agenda in terms of a tougher line on immigration, um, a maybe somewhat reduced role of the US in the world in terms of foreign policy, a lot of that has, 60, 70% support in the polls. So I think he has a different kind of backing in terms of popular kind of perception. He also has a very different kind of backing from corporate America. If you remember 2016, 2017, there was a lot of protests, a lot of tech companies, corporate leaders who kind of spoke out against Trump and things of that nature. This time, you really see the opposite. Everybody being very supportive and being very publicly supportive of the new administration. So that shifted. Plus, 2016, you had protests. I forgot about this, but preparing for today, I remember now, and read some articles about there were millions of people on the street, like this Monday and the next day, Tuesday, across the U.S. Biggest demonstrations in D.C., but essentially in a lot of major cities. And this time around, you're not going to have any of that. I don't think I haven't heard of any single kind of larger scale protest. So it's a very different environment. And as you said, the world has changed. So we'll see what the next 4 years bring. But I think Trump has the opportunity, that he's better prepared now. The team is better prepared now. I do think they have a very, very, very robust plan in place for the first 100 days. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. It's going to be an interesting ride.
I mean, I love the executive orders because I think it's a perfect example of the differences between DC and the US and Brussels and Europe. There is no such thing as an executive order. I am not even the constitution of the US, but it still works. But certainly nothing like that exists in Europe. There's nothing that Ursula von der Leyen could say, like, we're going to do this. And there will be process. It will need to be approved both by the council and the parliament. And I think that's just a perfect example to kind of see the different political climates on both sides of the Atlantic. So I'm not saying which one's better, but I think maybe some have a little bit more, are more sustainable. I would say I have to say that as a European, of course, representing Brussels here. But I do fully agree that just the people, staff, and the cabinet surrounding him this time. Just the chief of staff, she's been working with him for years. That certainly is a major factor. And before that, I think one of his first chief of staff, he only lasted for 11 days. So that takes a toll, obviously, on what you can achieve. So I think that certainly gives him a great head start. And as you said, public opinion is in his favor. But I will be watching closely because I think he does have a majority in Congress, but it's only a slight one. I think it's only two votes, if I remember correctly. So all of these executive orders will be, watched closely, obviously, by the Democrats. And he also has this split in the Republicans. All of them are very loyal right now. Obviously, we're seeing everyone's aligned. You have the MAGAs, you have the more like conservatives, but and maybe in the bigger cities. And you have the tech crowd, and all of them will have to stay aligned behind him. And I think that's going to be a struggle. I mean, most of Republicans are, of course, already eyeing 2028. Trump won't be running again. I doubt that he will manage to change the law to be able to run again. So there will be another Republican stepping up. We'll see if that's J.D. Vance, if he's clever, and probably if he manages to stay enough in the background. It's never good to be too much in the limelight with Trump. Or if it's going to be Hexeth or Marco Rubio, who knows? But I think that's certainly a thing to watch if if we're observing who's stepping forward, and especially in the first year, because it's tricky to survive next to Trump. What do you think? I mean, there certainly are key figures that will be shaping the AI and crypto agenda. You mentioned that yourself. Do you see that as a pressing issue? Do you think there's gonna be an executive order happening in that area already?
Yeah, I wanted to double click before we go into the crypto policy and tech policy on your point about the fractions. I think you have a very nuanced, differentiated view, which is obviously, well informed and totally accurate. I think outside in both from an international perspective, but even within the US, people who haven't worked in politics underestimate how much infighting there can be and how many fractions there are going to be in any administration, and how it's going to be kind of a tug of war, behind the scenes in the background happening essentially all the time. And you're right in that kind of within the Trump MAGA umbrella and the Trump movement, there's these different constituencies. There's, libertarians, there's maybe still a few neoconservatives, there's more blue collar working class type people, there's big tech, billionaire type of personalities. So I think bringing all of that together can be challenging, and we'll have to see certain policy areas which group kind of carries the day or has the largest share of his ear, and can get their things done. And it's something that I saw in my kind of transition days and campaign days. During the campaign, everybody is best friends, at least towards the outside world. And then you have this kind of peak transition is already a fight for positions, appointments, influence. So that can be really tough. But again, mostly internally, not externally, if it's done correctly. And then Inauguration Day is kind of this peak. And then, you go through this valley of actually governing, actually implementing things, actually bridging these gaps between different stakeholder groups, making very hard trade-offs, dealing with situations that can be very dynamic. So after the last transition that I did, we started into the first 100 days. After the first, 50 days, COVID hit, and we had to flip the script and come up with an entire new playbook. So I think, that's a truth and a challenge about governing. So it's never going to be as fun and as glorious and as easy as on Inauguration Day. To your question, in terms of crypto policy, David Sachs, who's the so-called crypto and AI policy czar, is a longtime confidant of Elon Musk. He's been around Republican circles for a long time. So I'm sure he'll do a great job kind of aligning the industry and figuring out next steps in terms of policy. I don't think there's a need for an executive order. So, as you know, the SEC was very active in bringing enforcement actions against various crypto companies during the Biden administration with Chairman Gary Gensler, him, departing the office, with, Paul Hatkins, the new chairman. I think that's going to just change the way they deal with the industry, their general enforcement strategy. So that's probably helpful. And then on the crypto side, you definitely need a legislative framework. That's something that I actually worked on in the last Congress when I was at Coinbase. There's some very solid proposals that are already out there. Personally, I do think it's going to take some more time to kind of iron out some of the positions, some of the provisions. But I do see that in the pipeline for the next, 9 to 12 months. Basically, Congress, also supported from the White House, going back to these existing drafts of crypto legislation and trying to bring them over the line just so that there's kind of a meaningful, robust framework for the cryptocurrency in the United States, like we have in Europe now. So, I think that's one example where even the industry itself was calling for regulatory clarity and was asking to be regulated. And it's good that we have some clarity and some guardrails in Europe. And I'm expecting the same in the US quite soon.
That's great to hear, because I usually hear the opposite, that we were too quick, or Brussels was too quick to regulate AI. I mean, someone had to someone had to start it off. But we do have the AI Act, and the implementation is already on the way. We have the major timeline and milestone in February and August. And I also, I experienced that while advising companies who are implementing it right now. First reaction is, oh my God, that's even more red tape. But then in the end, you see that it makes sense, and it's not as frightening anymore if you are guided and you know what needs to be done. But I think, in this the Commission will mostly focus now, first of all, on the implementation and setting up the AI office and the AI liability directive. So they are moving forward, but I would expect, certain pacing, seeing what the US does, because I do believe that not only in AI, but also in crypto and DeFi, that's an industry that should certainly be a part of the greater economic picture and trying to kickstart the European economy again. And we will see the competitiveness report later this month. Probably it has been postponed, but I think that will also provide several answers to the executive orders. And in general, we will know more about the geopolitical situation. I think Greenland will still be on its own terms, but we'll see. And it's just all embedded in this bigger picture of the relation between DC and Brussels, or Mar-a-Lago and Brussels. Let's be honest.
Sure. Maybe a quick shout out, to our viewers. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat now. We're going to take a look at those questions and comments in the next couple of minutes. I just wanted to kind of double click on the regulatory aspect of the regulatory strategy. Look, Veronica, as we've talked about before, and I talked about this with friends actually here in San Francisco last week as well. It will be very interesting because we do have, the pendulum swinging back. The Biden administration was not a hardcore regulatory state, but there was the crypto crackdown. There was some, initial executive order on artificial intelligence that provided some, I guess, guardrails and some, restrictions. Now we're going to see a more laissez-faire approach to tech and to tech policy, is my prediction, across, crypto, across artificial intelligence. And I think this will be a moment of truth again, for Europe and for Brussels. I think it's a challenge, and Brussels really needs to think very carefully about: do we want to double down on being the biggest and the best regulator of new emerging technologies in the world in the face of this deregulatory approach and shift in the US? Or should we rather adjust, course correct, maybe be a little less restrictive, so that we give European entrepreneurs, European companies more opportunities to compete with the Americans? I think fundamentally the playing field, the way I see it, having lived in Europe, having advised companies in Europe, living in the US now, it's not a level playing field. You have so many advantages being here. I mean, I love Europe. I'm rooting for Europe. I'm rooting for Austria. I'm rooting for Europe in general. But you have so many advantages playing here in terms of there's actually a single market. It's massive. Its economy is growing. People are doing well. It's one language only. It's one set of federal regulations only. You have actually a lot of subsidies. We didn't talk about the Biden era industrial policy yet, but there's a very, very strong boost to the economy provided by government funding and government subsidies, which is an area where Europe has been very cautious and very careful and hasn't really invested as much in the last couple of years. But I think seeing that, US companies have all those things going for them. China obviously has its own set of, again, government fueled and otherwise resources for companies. And so I think on the European side, there's really a question around how do we build a nurturing environment to become or to stay competitive, because the export-oriented industries of the past, are German automotive, right? The German cars that we sell to the US, to the rest of the world. I don't think that's going to take our generation all the way to, 2045, 2050, 2060, preserving our wealth and our economic well-being. So I think that's a huge challenge for Europe, and I'm excited. I hope, people like you and others in Brussels will be thought leaders and there will be action, but there needs to be, I think, a very, very strong push in the EU for change, for investment, for bolder, more creative policies in order for the European economy and European companies to be a little more competitive than they are today. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I mean, if the US is saying drill, baby, drill, we would need to say deregulate, baby, deregulate. I mean, we have an issue with that. It's not enough to just creatively regulate every sector and believe that that's going to draw in innovation, and that's not going to create an environment for founders or startups to be bold. So that's, but I do think, and I've seen that, and there has been a sort of a reckoning. I also admit that I think the external pressures also, created by Donald Trump, or President Trump by now, I believe, is, that of course accelerates this whole development. And the new commission will be tested, and that's going to be the question, if they have actually achieved that. There have been some initiatives during the last administration where they intended to cut back by 25%. I think that was a nice intention, but the execution lacked direction. I'm trying to put that in say it very diplomatically. But that's going to be the question, if they achieve this time. And we talked about the political landscape. Of course, you have also much more diverse political landscape in the different member states. We mentioned Giorgia Meloni already. Obviously, you have others that are counteracting sometimes the European efforts, and that's difficult to kind of consolidate all of these opinions. But I do believe that with the war in Ukraine, the fear and risk of losing the prosperity and losing companies, and those actually moving over to the US, as we've already seen, kind of an exodus, that just ask for very decisive action. And I'm also curious tomorrow in Davos, which is kind of the counter thing happening to the inauguration. Ursula von der Leyen will also be speaking. She's expected, of course, to react. So we'll see if there is already some kind of announcement or bold statement, hopefully.
Interesting. I'm very curious. I'm always, honestly, I'm a little skeptical. I mean, I support European leadership, but whenever, some commission person makes a speech somewhere in the world, I wonder how many headlines that will generate in European or in US, media. But maybe this time, if she says something really controversial or really, brilliant, maybe it'll receive more coverage. But I'll definitely follow. It's going to be interesting. Maybe on the note of kind of tech influence, the tech environment, also here in the US, it's something that came up in our preparation. Well, first I wanted to add, in terms of how much public investment the EU would need to become competitive. We had a little, chat in preparing, and off the cuff, I said 500 billion ballpark in terms of, funding innovation, funding research, providing more, growth equity, etc., funding opportunities for startups and scale-ups. And I realized afterwards, after doing some additional research, it's actually a good number. So Mario Draghi, in his famous Draghi report that was published last year on the future of the EU and what should be done, he landed at 800 billion. So, just to give our listeners a sense of the dimension, the magnitude of investment that the EU would need but it will take, as we were saying, political will and political capital to actually make that happen. And it's definitely going to take some more time, which I think Europe actually doesn't have. But let's pause on that topic. On the personnel side and the tech side, there's some misunderstanding, I think, in European media, and there's also, frankly, some controversy, which is legitimate, around is Silicon Valley going to run DC? Are all these tech bros and tech billionaires coming in and kind of taking the country for ransom? I think that's a little, misguided, all that controversy. So a couple of things I wanted to highlight there. Even in Europe, right? I mean, large companies, business executives have conversations with the government, right? I mean, you were part of this. You saw it both from the perspective being in government and trying to align with stakeholders, trying to get inputs, and with Red Bull and representing Austrian businesses in Brussels. On the flip side, trying to make coherent policy arguments vis-a-vis decision makers. And I did the same thing. I spent some time in the Austrian government trying to get inputs from industry, and then with Coinbase trying to advise decision makers and lawmakers on what the best path forward is. So I think that's not a new concept. Maybe the personnel is different, right? Because in Europe, we don't have such a big tech sector. There can't be any tech bros who come to Berlin or come to Brussels. I mean, there's a few, right? But it's not the same caliber. They're not like, 250 billion plus net worth individuals. But so I think, it's important to say, as a general thesis, private sector involvement is important. Stakeholder involvement is important. What is new in terms of the quality of engagement, I will grant that to any critics, is, a lot of these people actually have official positions or semi-official positions in the government, right? So Elon Musk has the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. Vivek Ramaswamy is co-heading that. We already talked about, the crypto czar, David Sachs. So I think quality of engagement and the quality of visibility is different. But even in previous democratic administrations, big tech CEOs, I'm sure, had, a red telephone that they could use to call the White House, to call the president, to call the White House chief of staff. So I think that kind of general intersection of politics and tech, and, the Silicon Valley having a very strong presence in DC and being heard and being listened to, I think that's been around for many years. So I'm personally not too worried. Of course, there's some concerns around conflicts of interest, and we'll have to see how it plays out. But in general, it's good to get fresh perspective. And I think the theme of private sector and public sector, how they can work together and how you can take top talent from industry and get them involved in government decision making, that's important. And I think we need to find better models there. So I'm not too worried. But Veronica, what's the European perspective there?
I mean, in terms of the tech oligarchy, I think we all followed that discussion happening last week, and you were referencing that. I mean, as you said, there's always certain players that have higher influence. I mean, that's also part of some certain group is elected. There are proxies, or as I said, players connected to those who were elected. I think what is the crucial point here is that, of course, with the sheer influence and force and power that comes with tech platforms and the influence they have, of course, that makes it, it's a new level of influence, and it's unheard of, and we've never seen that and experienced that in a way, or in such a global way. We had, of course, different industries that were, you mentioned the auto industry in the 20th century, but this also is about freedom of speech and the question of controlling public opinion. So I think that's why, of course, the European reaction to that are regulations like the DSA and Digital Services Act, and the question on how to face that. It's, of course, also a reaction to the overpowering force of U.S. tech companies. But I think, especially working with those established in the EU, I mean, it's their business model also to make it feasible and sustainable for the users. So of course, should be a win-win situation. But I do think that that's kind of Europeans will have an eye on that. And I do believe that it's gonna, it's also gonna be a question for the Republicans on how to consolidate different fractions. In terms of the capital that you mentioned, of course, because it's big money. That's what it is in the end. And that's also the question on how much, for example, venture capital is available in Europe, because you would need that. We have Horizon programs, the big R&D program for Europe, which is of course a great lever, but it's you can't compare it with the amount of venture capital that is available in the U.S. And I believe it's around 200 billion in the US versus 57 billion in the EU. So it's fourth, and that of course plays a massive has a massive impact on the possibilities to develop economically. So I think that should be a core focus for Europe and for the politicians and commissioners right now. I wanted to take on one comment by Jens. I think it's a very valid point about Germany, and kind of saying that he's not afraid of the tariffs that Trump is possibly going to issue, because it's a moment of truth and a possibility for example, Germany to get back on the feet. I agree. I think we need to be optimistic, and I think it's our responsibility to get out of the narrative that Europe is lagging behind. It's everyone and everybody just needs to do their best to get back on their feet, and it's not the first bearish period, so we can work on that again. And for the tariffs, I mean, that's certainly something that Europe needs to focus on. You mentioned the internal market, which is one of our strongholds, but we need to decrease the burdens and hurdles in the internal market and look for new possibilities for trade agreements, because we have it's not the era of trade anymore. It's protectionist measures all over the world, protectionism galore. And so that's certainly must be a core focus area for Europe to find diversified markets where we can export our wonderful European products.
I love that. Maybe briefly to double click on one thing that you said there, Veronica, that I think is so crucial is just in terms of the mindset and the energy. Europe is always making itself smaller than it is. And I'm not saying Europe has to, be super proactive and super, aggressive and bump their fists on the table all the time. But the reality in the world that we live in is, you obviously have China being quite proactive and quite aggressive on a number of issues. You have the US now under Trump 2.0 being very assertive. And so I think you will have to be assertive. It's also a new paradigm of foreign policy, right, or of geopolitics, which is less this rules-based international order, but more transactional, more deals-based, more around trying to get leverage, trying to be playful, trying to maybe play some tricks on your opponents or your partners. And I think Europe needs to come to terms with that. I don't think the old world, the 1990s to maybe Obama period days are ever going to come back. And you need to adjust your mindset. I'm sure that's hard, for career civil servants or diplomats who've been around for 20, 30 years, who've only ever lived through that period that we just talked about. It will be a big shift, but I think for Europe to compete in this new age, the next, 10, 15 years, I think you just need to acknowledge that some of these paradigms have shifted. We're not going back to the old world. And so therefore Europe needs to adjust its ways of doing business and its ways of doing policy as well in response.
Yes, but I mean, deal making, wonderful, being tough on your red lines and being strategic about it, and don't hold back, fully agree. I think the basically the red line is always the fake news and just kind of pretending and shaping the world as to your liking that has happened throughout the last years. I think that's tough. It's a tough cookie. How do you balance that in a world where you can tweet something and it changes an entire the entire trajectory of your economy? And that's something to grapple with. And I mean, that's why it's so important that all of us are well informed and try to stay ahead of things and don't buy into everything just because we see it online.
Yeah, that's a great point. But also I think it's great because I think there's some nuance between our various perspectives, and um, I think we're doing a decent job of kind of contrasting a little bit the European take and the American take on some of these issues. So that's been a lot of fun. Maybe to wrap it up, we're going to do another maybe 5 to 10 minutes. We wanted to really give you an insight into what to expect kind of this week and also the first 100 days of the Trump presidency. So we're going to go into that segment of our little talk today now. Um, and I think it's interesting because it's also a bit of a mirror for Europe. I think a lot of what Trump is doing is action in policy areas where Europe also needs to take action or maybe shift its policy a little bit. And we can talk about that, Veronica. So from what we're hearing, in the media today, there won't be any immediate action on tariffs. My personal interpretation is, the tariffs part of his platform is the one element that commentators were worried about, that economists were worried about, that the business community was worried about. Why is that? Well, I mean, first of all, it's going to hurt, it's going to impact business activity. Second of all, arguably Biden lost the election because of inflation. Inflation was the number one issue. If you talk to, median income families here in the US, it was really hard, kind of the post-COVID inflation that happened here. And tariffs, of course, would have a very big chance of reigniting inflation for certain types of goods and services. So I think it's good, and it makes sense that they would proceed with caution. There's also a question of, do you hit Canada, Mexico, the EU? Do you hit them across the board? Do you hit them on certain industries? So I think it's smart in terms of the policy platform, if the reporting is true, that tariffs are going to be more like a, month two, month three down the line type of action item. One area where we've already seen action is foreign policy. So, the Israel Hamas deal kind of settlement that happened the last couple of days, that's, I guess, to a large extent still run by the Biden administration, but already facilitated by the Trump team. I think that's kind of even the first win, even on day one for Trump. And he'll make more efforts, in terms of Ukraine, in terms of other situations, to have, foreign policy wins in that same on the same level. Another area, of course, is immigration. Immigration was a key part of Trump's platform. It was probably the biggest segment of his campaign speeches. It was, for most people in the U.S., the second biggest concern in the election, right after the inflation issue. So there's going to be action on the border. There's going to be perhaps some type of enforcement actions in major cities. There were some rumors over the weekend on kind of immigration, enforcement in Chicago or other major cities. So that's something that I see very much happening in the next 24, 48 hours. And then we also know that energy is going to be big. So on the one hand, reducing restrictions on fracking, drilling, oil. For an executive order, Trump might declare some type of energy emergency that gives him additional powers and more flexibility. So I think, foreign policy, immigration, and energy are definitely three areas where we'll see immediate action. And I think those are also areas that, should be top of mind for Europe, right? On the foreign policy side, obviously, Ukraine is very pressing from a European perspective. On the immigration side, I think Europe has a lot of homework yet to be done. And on the energy side, related to Ukraine and Russia, Europe's energy supply has stabilized now through liquefied natural gas and diversification of sources, but it's still at the core of low growth, inflation, and the struggling industrial sector in Europe. energy piece is still very, very much a big part of that. So I think the to-do list or the bucket list for the first week and the first 100 days, Trump's agenda, should in some way maybe be mirrored in Europe in terms of, things, action areas where Europe really needs to up its game. Veronica, what do you think?
I mean, you've already touched upon the main points, and I think we've already painted kind of a picture of what the EU might be doing in the next days. I think the question of immigration, and of course, not only the border, but also how they're going to deal with migrant workers. I'm talking about the H-1B visa. I mean, that just wraps it up, and it's that's going to be very interesting. I think also for the tech bubble. Who's going to win? Is it going to be the kind of line to take that immigration needs to be fought, or that they actually need skilled workers? And we know that Elon Musk has been very vocal about that because, of course, his business is not only his, but is dependent on skilled workers, those who do not have right to reside or right to work without that visa in the States. So I think that's going to be certainly something to watch. And you mentioned Doge already, so I've heard that that's going to be one of the first things, kind of sketching out what Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk are supposed to be doing. I mean, they have been staffing already, but I do believe that's going to be one of the things that we're also going to see moving rather quickly, because if they want to keep their promises of working and on kind of working on that swamp and deswamping the administration, that's gonna take a lot of effort, will be highly complex, difficult, and they will need to do it quick, because of course a lot of the initiatives will kind of build on the question of who's actually working in the administration and the civil servants. So I think that's going to be interesting. Other topics like the External Revenue Service, I mean, that's going to be, could be highly influential, but let's see what's really going to be proposed in that regard, because that could be massive, of course, and would target a lot of external actors too. So I think that's to add to your points. I think that's what I would like to add, and maybe that's already kind of looking to our next episodes. I think that those will be topics that we will be talking about as well. You mentioned your experience in the project in the Austrian Federal Task Force to kind of a Doge à la Autrichienne, so to speak. So I think that will be something we will be discussing. And of course, we'll be watching the executive orders in detail in the next hours, and would be very happy to see a lot of you for the next episode. Do you want to give some maybe insights on what we have planned, or I think that might be good.
100%. Yeah. As mentioned in the outline in the beginning, this is a lot of fun. Veronica and I have kind of different sort of parallel careers between Europe and the US, and we believe in the idea of transatlantic dialogue, conversation. We do believe that tech policy is one of the most important topics and issue areas for our generation, for the next generation, probably for many generations to come. So I hope you join us on that journey. We're actively considering different topics, different types of guest speakers. So if there's something you're interested in, if you want to be featured as a guest of the podcast, definitely shoot us a line. We're going to be sharing our contact information as well. So maybe briefly, as mentioned in the intro, my firm doing advisory for startups on fundraising, go-to-market, and policy is Rees Ventures. You can find me at Stefan with a PHAN at Rees-ventures.com or stefan.rihs at gmail.com. Eventually, we're also going to have our own, separate email address for the podcast where you can submit feedback and reflections and ideas. And yeah, we're excited to start the journey. I think from a technical side, LinkedIn Live has been fun and a good experience. So we're probably going to stay on this channel. But yeah, do get in touch with us and let us know what you'd like to learn from the US side, from the European side. And I think it'll be a lot of fun. Veronica, over to you for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, well, looking forward to the next episode. I do believe we covered all of the comments. Connect with us. You'll find us on LinkedIn and all the major social platforms. TikTok, as long as it's online, and we're happy to accommodate your things that you would like to discuss and you find interesting. And you find my consulting business on moverconsulting.com. Happy to collaborate with you. And with that, I believe Trump has just announced that they will leave the Paris Accord in terms of global climate policy, but that's for someone else to discuss. I think we'll stick to tech.
Interesting. Yeah, exciting times. Veronica, this was great fun, and see you at the next one.
Talk to you soon. All the best. Bye.